he has this woman in his chapel in the rectory who's slithering across the floor like a snake, foaming at the mouth, and her eyes are rolled back in her head. And he's doing all these prayers. And then he looks at his watch and he says, okay, I'm going to go celebrate Mass. I'll be back in an hour. Just stay with her. And I'm like, what? He leaves. She looks up at me and she's got this weird look in her eyes and she's got the foam coming out of her mouth. And I'm like, oh, hell no.
I mean, how did you get into exorcisms?
Well, that's interesting too. You know, after 9/11, I moved up to Boston and I wound up staying with a priest for about 9 months and he did deliverance ministry. In fact, the very first weekend I arrived, and I didn't know him that well, but I'm out of luck. I have no job now and now I have no place to live because I was so close. They closed everything under Canal Street. So there was no power, there was no gas, there was no electricity. And so basically everyone was told, go find a place to live for at least 6 months because this isn't going to be up and running anytime soon. So this priest invited me up to Boston. I said, I'll go. I go up there and he was amazing. But he had this ministry. So my first weekend there, he has this woman in his chapel in the rectory who's slithering across the floor like a snake and foaming at the mouth and her eyes are rolled back in her head. And he's doing all these prayers. And then he looks at his watch and he says, okay, I'm going to go celebrate Mass. I'll be back in an hour. Just stay with her. And I'm like, what? This is my first introduction to this life. He leaves. She looks up at me and she's got this weird look in her eyes and she's got the foam coming out of her mouth. And I'm like, oh, hell no. And I get out of there and I lock her inside and I sat outside and waited for him to come back. Well, he comes back and he's like, what are you doing? What happened to the lady? I go, no, she's in there. But I'm not staying in there with her. I mean, are you crazy? You left me alone with her. And he's like, oh, okay. I sometimes forget for the people who haven't been around this, it's a little jarring. I'm like, a little jarring. Look at her. She looks like a snake.
My God.
So that was my introduction initially. And then for 9 months, he would do this with people. And I got more comfortable in being in the room with him.
Like how many times in 9 months?
Probably one or two a month.
1 or 2 a month?
Yep. Yeah. And then I went into religious life, and my superior was an exorcist, the Exorcist of Omaha. So now I'm in the room because they usually took the guys who were a little bit bigger to restrain the victim. And I got 5 years of that. And then when I got to Nashville, the bishop knew I was doing that for the religious community. And he says, I want you to do that here for my diocese. Can you do the deliverance? But he says, I'm not going to make you an exorcist because I feel like that's too big a burden on one priest. And I said, okay. And then he died, God rest his soul, Bishop Joby. And then the new bishop comes in, and I don't have his authority because he hasn't given it to me. So as the priests are calling me for help, I keep referring them to him. I said, he has to give me the authority. I don't do this without being under his protection. And so he finally connects with me and says, why do these priests keep asking for you? I said, I was doing the deliverance for the diocese, but when Bishop Joby died, I no longer had the authority. So it's up to you. He said, are you the exorcist? I said, no. He didn't want any particular priest to be an exorcist. He thought it was too big a burden. And he says, I don't know, I kind of feel like you're fighting with your hands tied behind your back. Like, I think you should become the exorcist. So he sends me to Rome, and I get trained, and then I come back and begin as the exorcist.
What does that training consist of?
It's intense. It's like...
How does it start? I mean, is there an introduction? Welcome to exorcism school?
Yeah, it was for like 2 weeks, 6 days a week, 7 in the morning to 7 at night.
What is the introduction? What do they say?
Well, this is kind of going to be the syllabus and protocol for what we're going to go into. There's probably about 6 or 7 different fields, biblical, practicums, the devil in Hollywood, the devil in media, the devil, Harry Potter had its own class.
Harry Potter?
Oh, yeah. So you get finished up, they pair you with a mentor who's been doing this a while, and my mentor was in Indianapolis. And so I met with him on a kind of regular basis, and he took me through some of his cases, and I watched him do actual exorcisms, and then, eventually you get your first case that you do it. And I'll never forget it. It was in Murfreesboro.
Hold on. Before we get there, how long is the school?
It's like 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
It's intense. They put it like 2 months into 2 weeks.
Is it book work? Is it practical?
It's everything. Yeah, we actually have case studies of actual exorcisms that have been performed. What happened? What you should do? What you shouldn't do. That class was the best class. Don't do this.
What do?
So if the victim vomits up anything, including it could be vomit, it could be small frogs, it could be nails, do not touch them. They're cursed objects until you liberate the objects from the demons and the curses, and then you can clean them up. I'm like, I'm not touching anybody's vomit, period. I don't care if you're a demon possessed or not. Like, that's not my thing. I'd be like, can someone come in and help me clean this up? But then knowing that this could actually, you touch it and then suddenly you're covered in boils. Like, it's a whole level of care and attention to dealing with possessed objects.
Do they talk about how it happens?
How does one get possessed?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, of course. 100%. And the two biggest ways are dabbling in the occult and...
What does that mean?
Playing with demonic things, Ouija boards, going to a psychic, tarot cards, or actual occult worship of the devil. Those are pretty much immediate open doors that you're going to have demons come right in.
Psychics are demonic.
Yeah, they're not channeling your dead relatives. So right now, we have at least 3 guardian angels in the room. There's also probably demons in this room, and they're listening, and they hear every bit of what we're saying. Excuse me. And when somebody says, well, the psychic told me my mother shared this with me when I was 10, and nobody ever knew that but us. So it has to be my mom, except for the demons in the room who also heard it. And now they're impersonating your mother. If your mother's in heaven, she's having a good day. She doesn't want to come back and visit you, as much as mothers love their children. If she's in purgatory, she needs our prayers to get her moved into heaven. And if she's in hell, there's no getting out. It's not your mother.
Wow.
They can put up a good show, and it's very, they can also place thoughts in our minds, and they can manipulate our emotions. And when you have that trifecta, the person is 100% believes it's their mother.
Interesting. And so how would, so if you're a psychic and I'm getting a reading from you, how does the transmission happen?
Well, they're in touch with a demon they may even think it really is a relative. But I think most of them know that there's a power they're tapping into that is dark, and they're not going to share that with you. In fact, some of them will put Christian statues in the room. Sacred Heart is over here, Our Lady of Fatima is over here, just to lower the anxiety level of the person coming in. Because a lot of people have heard it's really not a good thing, but they get desperate. When people are desperate or in fear, they do things they wouldn't normally do. So, after the Civil War. These charlatans came up with these talking boards that they were going around and visiting all the widows, saying, I can contact your dead husband, the soldier who died. If you, can pay me this amount, we can do it with this talking board. And they made a lot of money off of these poor widows. And then that eventually became what was being known as the Ouija board, which was bought by Hasbro, toy company, and they're based in Salem, Massachusetts, the capital of witchcraft. And they have consultants who went into the development of these boards that became Ouija boards, and that they are the first to say that they asked the board what its name is, and it said Ouija, which means nothing. And the first year they went to market, the number one board game was Monopoly, and that year Ouija boards outsold Monopoly by 1 million boards. So it was embraced by the culture, fast. Mm-hmm. And it's opening a portal right into hell.
Interesting. How else can the transmission happen?
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And If you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.